Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to see so many sharp brains in our audience. So you made it to the right place. My name is Marzena Ermler, and I work for the Office of Staff Development at the New York Public Library. And this is one of our first series in which we combine the audiences. We have invited staff from our library and other libraries and the public, because the message is universal, I think. We all need to know how to preserve our brain, and we all need to know how to make it fit as much as possible. So before Alvaro gets introduced, I will introduce Joshua Steinerman from Montefiore Medical Center. He is the assistant professor of neurology, and Joshua will introduce the main speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Necessary. Good afternoon. I am Joshua Steinerman. I'm a cognitive neuropsychiatrist at the Einstein Aging Study, as well as Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. And I'm really very excited to be here today. And I want to tell you a little bit why. For over 20 years, the Einstein Aging Study has been systematically studying older adults in New York. And we've been looking for risk factors for cognitive decline, as well as protective factors for what we consider successful brain aging. And many times we have found, and this has been replicated in other studies in New York and throughout the world, that those people who engage in high levels of cognitively stimulating activities, but also socially engaging activities and leisure activities, really are protected and have decreased risk for the onset of Alzheimer's disease, for example. And even among people who do ultimately get diagnosed with diseases like Alzheimer's disease, high degrees of brain fitness, that is, cognitively stimulating activity, social engagement, and other lifestyle factors could actually delay the onset of symptoms. But why I think we're at such a critical period right now, really a tipping point, is that we, together with our partners here in the New York Public Library and in the community, and Alvaro and SharpBrains, need to move beyond simply watching and observing the demonstration of protective effects of brain fitness and cognitive interventions. What we really need to do is educate ourselves and the people around us to see if we could actually promote brain fitness and promote brain health in the community prospectively. And that's why being at this event is such an opportune occasion. The New York Public Library, obviously for generations, has been an outstanding resource for cognitively stimulating materials. And since the very beginning of the brain fitness revolution, Alvaro Fernandez and SharpBrains has really been a strong and objective voice trying to communicate to the public and to professionals scientific and rational approaches to promoting brain health and separating sometimes confusing messages in the media and from the hype. And that's why I encourage you to listen in great detail to Alvaro today. He's a treat and a lot to offer. But really take home the message and take it back to your local branches and look in the community for venues for which you could promote brain fitness and encourage people around you. And you could look for more activities from the Einstein Aging Study. And as we move towards education and promoting brain fitness in the community, we look forward to demonstrating that we actually can make a difference by promoting brain fitness. So now I want to turn this over to Alvaro Fernandez. Thank you for including me in this program, and I look forward to a great event.
Thank you, Joshua. Well, thank you everyone for coming here on a Friday afternoon. You are in Manhattan. I'm sure you could have gone to 50 million other places, so I appreciate the effort. What we will do is we will maybe have an hour or so of a lecture, more type, and then we'll have half an hour for Q&A, because we truly want to have a good dialogue as well. The introduction was just perfect, why the topic is so important, so timely. So let me go ahead with the first brain exercise of the day, which is I would like to ask all of you to, with your hands, try to draw a circle with your right hand and a square with the left one at the same time. I promise I'm not taking any picture of you right now. Well, okay, so it's difficult, right? Okay, you can stop. That's brain exercise. So many times when we think of the brain, it sounds all this very complex stuff. You have to think very hard. Well, the brain also is important for motor coordination. When you even try to process the instruction I gave you, you have to engage what is called your working memory, trying to remember, hey, what did this guy say? It was a circle with one hand, the square with the other one. So it was something good in that it was outside your routine. It's not an exercise you do in your daily life, I hope, for most of you. I don't know what job you would have if you would spend the whole day doing this. So it's novel and it's challenging, and we will talk today why those are important ingredients of good mental stimulation. And exactly as Joshua was saying, we already understand that mental stimulation is good, but what types may be better than others? What are the key ingredients that we can engage through our lives, through our education, our work, the kind of activities we attend? They all have to involve novelty, variety, and challenge. That's a key message I think is important for the lecture today and the book. We will talk more about that later, but this was an easy way to drive the message home. What we find often when we talk about the subject in a variety of contexts is the amount of myths that people have out there. And it would be, we could have written a 1,000-book page just trying to debunk all the myths out there. So we cannot do that, but we try to identify what are the myths that seem to be obstacles for people to make good decisions about their own brain health. So let me cover them very quickly. One is, the whole genetic revolution is amazing, all the knowledge. People do now genetic testing of themselves, but we have to debunk the myth that genes themselves are the most important factor that influence how our brains evolve as we get older. It depends on our lifestyle, depends on our environment, depends on our daily decisions, our daily actions. So yes, genes predispose us, but not at all determine our fate. So it's very important to keep that in perspective. Second, another dangerous myth is that aging, just by itself, is automatic decline. And that's not the case. There are many studies, including the Einstein one, showing huge amount of variability in how older adults age, based on their education level, based on their lifestyles. You can have, and probably in your real life, you know, some people in their even 80s, 90s are extremely lucid, active, some other maybe not, and they are in a nursing home. So there is a big variability. And the good news is that that happens because now we live longer, right, than ever in history. So it's great news to know that life expectancy now is maybe 80 years at birth. 100 years ago, in developed countries was maybe 50 years. So now we live longer, which means there's more scope for variability, reflecting our individual lives. Third, another myth is that medication itself is going to be the main hope, or the only hope, for cognitive enhancement, to prevent Alzheimer's disease, that someday we will have a magic pill, and that's it. Why think about the brain? Why think about brain fitness? Well, the bad news is that that's magic pill. We don't see a way. It's going to be here in our lifetime. It's impossible for something to improve all the brain functions at the same time. So there's always going to be a very important role for what we talk today, which is lifestyle, which is a variety of brain fitness programs. Scientific American this week has a great article, is the cover story, in fact, on cognitive enhancement via medicaments and why it's not going to happen anytime soon. Again, pills can be very useful for specific goals, for specific populations. They also do have side effects, so a doctor is the best person to prescribe to make sure everything is taken care of. But we don't think cognitive enhancement via drugs is going to be population-wide the most useful way ahead. Everyone has heard the use it or lose it, but obviously there is one thing perhaps misleading there, which is there's not just one it. I mean, it refers to the brain, but the brain itself has different structures that have up to a point different functions. So the same way we understand our body, I mean, it's one body, but I have many different muscles, and my abdominal muscles are different than my biceps, than my cardiovascular capacity. The same thing, the brain has different functions, and it's important to maintain, to exercise a variety of them, not just one. Not all mental activity is equal. So right now, I'm engaged in mental activity because I'm talking. You are engaged in mental activity because you are listening. So all of us, any given day of our lives, we engage in different types of mental activity. If I had an fMRI connected right now to my head, the scientists could see which parts of my brain are being activated through my behaviors. So the point I want to make is that not all mental activity is the same. So when we think about use it or lose it, well, there are some ways, and I see some people I know here, so I want to say hello, is that watching TV is mental activity, but that's not the kind of mental activity that is going to result in any benefit over time. So we're going to talk about the ingredients for good mental activity. The great news here is that now it's been proven beyond any doubt that even adults, no matter the age, are creating new neurons every single day. So when you go to sleep tonight, in your brain, there will be neurons that weren't there this morning. Not only that, there are lifestyle factors like aerobic exercise that can even impact that amount of creation or death of new neurons. So there's many things we can do to literally take care of our physical brain, and that improves our attention, our memory, a variety of functions. But until recently, most scientists would have said that's impossible, that only kids have all this neurogenesis, adults didn't have it. Today we know it's a lifelong process. Now, there is nothing called brain age, and maybe you know the Nintendo game that has been very popular for the last few years. It's a very fun game, and I mean, we will talk about that more later, but the whole brain age concept is just a marketing gimmick to try to get people engaged, and it's a fun thing to think, but don't think of it from the scientific medical point of view. There's no way, it doesn't even make sense to say, I'm going to roll back my brain age 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And not everyone needs the same mental exercise. The book deals with a variety of groups, from kids who have attention deficit disorder or dyslexia, to professionals who work in very stressful environments, to older adults who maybe are retired. All of these groups have different priorities. Some of them may need more aerobic exercise, which is a kind of mental exercise. I will talk about that later. Or stress management, how I manage my own stress. We have a yoga instructor here who in fact told me that she was doing a lot of yoga classes for staff here. So that's a great type of mental exercise as well. So we need to be better educated in what can be our needs, what are our needs, and what is our priority. So that's what we try to do with the book, present all the information on many options, and then help you understand which one can be more relevant. This is a picture I took from my house a couple of weeks ago, and I think it, in a sense for me, maybe more philosophically, represents the moment we are right now, which is, as Joshua said, is a new paradigm, is a new understanding of what the brain is capable of, what are the properties of the brain through life. We don't have to accept decline. The brain is much more flexible, no matter our age. Older brains can learn as much as younger brains, perhaps slower, but they can always learn. So there is a lot of new hope, a lot of new activity from the cognitive neuroscience community that we have to start to understand little by little. Again, there's no magic pill, there's no magic prescription that is going to say, this is what you have to do to triple your brain power. That doesn't exist. But there is a lot of useful guidelines that can be very useful to improve our lives, our productivity, and to delay the onset of potential memory problems. The most important thing here is that we don't develop or sell products, because if we did, we would have a conflict of interest. We are a purely educational and informational resource, usually working with hospitals, insurance companies, investors, research labs who want to understand what is going on, and we publish market reports for them. But having done that for several years, what we realize is that many other consumers and also health professionals wanted to understand all the information for themselves or for their clients or patients, and that's why we try to package the most important information in this book. The website, SharpBrains.com, has a lot of free resources. We have a monthly newsletter where we have a lot of articles on what is new, and a lot of articles and brain teasers as well. That's one of the most popular sections of the website. Now, why is this topic important? For many reasons, one of which is the aging population. So according to US Census projections, in less than 20 years, or maybe 30 years, depends how we count, the amount of people alive in the US alone over the age of 55 is going to close to double. So think of the implications for society of having moving from 60 million over 55 to close to 100 million over 55. Retirement policies will have to change. We are talking about healthcare. We are talking about many, many things. But the most important thing to know from the point of view of people who are over 55 or planning to be over 55 at some point is that there are many things we can do to age and protect our brain functions, to be able to stay productive, to keep working as long as we want, to keep driving as long as we work, to try to delay Alzheimer's symptoms. So the whole field of brain fitness, which again can be very useful for kids as well or for professionals, is growing now more and more from the healthy aging point of view because we have all this big population to try to help. There is a lot of media confusion, there is a lot of media attention to the field, which is good, but also a lot of media confusion that is pretty bad, because I think most of you are very interested, obviously you are here, but second, if you just read the New York Times or any newspaper, every week there is an article that says the opposite of what was there the week before. So it's impossible to make sense. Why does it happen? It happens because the medical and scientific community, they know a lot, but they are usually very specialized in specific areas. Some people specialize in what we call invasive interventions, in how to use drugs or even devices for clinical groups, people who have very serious problems, and how to help them. We have different people and even different channels more interested in lifestyle. And that, I mean, you can think how there are many health clubs in the US, worldwide. So those people are thinking how lifestyle itself, maybe even aerobic exercise, can contribute to cognitive fitness. Then you have another field of researchers and companies and channels thinking about more structured interventions. They can be things like meditation or cognitive therapy or biofeedback or cognitive training. We will talk much more about that later in the talk, who are also publishing research and offering products. So what we want to do with the book and with our work in general is to explain from a consumer side, well, how do you use all these different things in a way that you know how to use them as appropriate. We ran a major poll earlier this year with over 2,000 respondents, trying to ask them, okay, if there is all this new research of what is possible, how we can help people's brains, people's memories, what's the obstacle for that knowledge to be applied in a mainstream way? And the first response was public awareness, that many people still don't understand how the brain works, that the brain can be maintained, the implications for our jobs, for our education. So public awareness itself is very important. And by the way, that's one reason why the New York Public Library is being an ally in this effort, trying to say, hey, this public awareness is not only for librarians, it's for the public, it's for anyone who is interested. And libraries, public libraries, can play a huge role here. The other obstacle is how to navigate, how to compare claims. So just by watching the media, again, just by reading the newspapers, talking to friends, every day, I'm sure, you get 3 new ideas of something that can help your brain. Well, how do you make sense of all of that? So how do you navigate the different claims to make good decisions? And that's why we try to publish the book, trying to compare all these different research areas and potential programs. So this is, I mentioned, that's why we wanted to publish the book. So the book is not titled How to Triple Your Brain Power in 10 Easy Minutes. That's not what it is about. It's about, hey, you are being bombarded with information all the time, and you will be even more bombarded the next years because we can see the research that is coming. How do you start to think about making good decisions today? How you plan your life around this research? That's what we want to do, just to provide useful information. So we structure, and by the way, this was our co-author, Elhonon Goldberg, has published 3 other very good books, a bit more technical on the executive brain, on the frontal lobes of the brain. This, we collaborated to try to make it more accessible for a lay audience, but it was a good brain exercise for ourselves in thinking, well, how do we structure the book in a way that is educational, that is useful for a very broad audience? So first we thought we had to to present just the basics of the brain, right? Most people know more about their cars, how they work, how to repair them, than about their own brains. Well, maybe it's time to start to change that and talk a bit about our brains. Second is we talk about the 4 pillars of brain maintenance, why nutrition is important, and it complements aerobic exercise, stress management, and mental stimulation. All of the 4 are very important, and for different reasons. So we have to understand how to integrate the 4 in our lives. Third, we will talk, and again, this comes from the book, but I will try to summarize the key messages in all these sections. We will talk about a big difference that I think is being missed in the media. What's the difference between just mental activity? Again, watching TV is mental activity. I have to process what I'm watching. And mental exercise, which is what requires a bit of effort, and it's going to be better for the brain. It will create more connections. It will contribute to maintaining memory and attention and other functions. From the body point of view, I think all of us understand the difference. I'm from Spain, so you can see I'm moving my hands often. Well, that's physical activity, but that's not physical exercise. That's not going to grow my biceps. If I want to grow my biceps, I have to do some targeted exercise, so that's a clear difference. The same thing happens with the brain, so we have to understand that. Then we will talk briefly about how to evaluate and choose many different products out there. And just one example, many people still today are having many supplements. One of the most popular is ginkgo biloba, despite more and more research showing that it doesn't work. Some other things seem to work more often. I mean, so they're not perfect science, but there's already very useful guidelines, what to do, what not to do, that I think most people are not aware of. Or maybe they are aware of, but they choose not to follow. I mean, and that's fine, I guess. Then we will talk a bit about, so this is a new field. Doesn't mean we have the perfect solutions right now, but there are very interesting things to start thinking about. So the last chapters are more about, okay, what is coming, what is the future, what can you do now? And opening the debate, I think that's the role of this lecture itself. And the Neuro Public Library, this is a very exciting field with huge implications for education, for healthcare, even from the workplace. Well, it's a good way to start a debate, to be talking about the brain, about things like working memory, about why emotions interact with decision making. So there are many things that the takeaway is, let's start the conversation now. We do have billions of neurons, which is what we have here on the left, which are connected to others through many connections or synapses. Each neuron, well, some kind of neurons can have up to 10,000 connections. Now, what is very important when we think about use it or lose it, what use it or lose it really means is that when we engage, so right now, because I'm speaking, there is a pattern of many millions of neurons that are talking at the same time, enabling me to be able to talk to you right now. So those neurons are talking to each other, and just by doing that, the connection between those neurons, you can see those branches, is becoming physically stronger. So those neurons that are being used are more likely to survive. That if I never ever use, and they don't develop connections with other neurons. So when we talk about plasticity, or brain plasticity, or neuron plasticity, it means that our habits physically alter the physical composition of our brains. All of you, I'm sure, have heard the "you are what you eat," and that's partially true, but in terms of the brain, you are what you think, because this is what's going on all the time. There is a very nice book, by the way. It's a slightly old book by Marianne Diamond. It's called The Magic Trees of the Mind. It's more about children development, but it's a beautiful metaphor that those are the magic trees of the mind, and that's how we can see our physical brains. The brain is a complex system, which is why there will never be simplistic solutions to its brain maintenance and function. Some areas deal with motor coordination, some with learning new things, some with memory, some with planning ahead, some with language, some with visualizing all what I'm saying. So I don't want to spend too much time, because we don't have time in the lecture, going one by one. We talk a bit in the book, but the point is that there are many different structures. It's a system of different units. So we cannot just think doing crossword puzzles is enough, because crossword puzzles may be good for one little part of the brain, but it's neglecting all the other part of the brain. Is if I go to the health club, I only do one machine to have train my biceps, I will have the biggest biceps in the room, right? But the rest of the body would be a joke. So it's important to be thinking of different functions and cross-training, and that's why, again, learning a bit about the brain is so important. One particular part of the brain that is very important to learn about is the part in blue here, which is behind the forehead, which is proportionally bigger in humans than in any other species, even if other species also have that part of the brain. That deals with decision-making, with regulating behavior, with planning ahead. So that's very important to protect, because as people get older, when they don't make good decisions with their finances, by the way, that can happen as we go along, right? But I mean, that happens more often, or they get fooled by some telemarketer, or I mean, they start to lose independence. They cannot make own decisions. That's the part of the brain that is often most compromised. That is very flexible part of the brain. It matures later in life, in our mid-20s. So you can wonder why we allow teenagers, 16, to be driving a car, which is such a complex activity, before their brains are ready for such a complex activity. That also is the area that tends to decline first as we get older. So it's very important to use that through learning new complex activities. We will talk more about that later. What is brain fitness? So we define it as the general state of feeling alert, in control, productive. It's about having the right brain functions, the right mental activities to succeed in our environment. It can be our school, it can be our workplace, it can be our family. It is not about IQ. It's not about who is smart, who is not smart. That's pretty irrelevant in this conversation. It's also not mainly about Alzheimer's disease. As Joshua mentioned, engaging in mental activity can delay the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, which is an added benefit. But I think the most important message is brain fitness is mostly useful today to maintain our attention, our memory, to be more productive. And yes, by the way, it will have long-term benefits, but there is much more research on what can help people now that what may delay people's Alzheimer's disease 30 years from now, because you can imagine it takes 30, 40 years, which is what Einstein has been doing to track people over a long period of time. So we will talk later about why we need to change the culture. And it's not about Alzheimer's disease, it's about fitness. And we understand that physical fitness is about being fit now. It's about being more functional, being able to walk everywhere, to play sports, to do good things with our lives. That's the better way to understand brain fitness. The last question, can it be measured today? Yes, it can, but most of the instruments that are serious are only available to clinicians and to researchers. They are not open to the general consumer, which I think is a pity. I think it will change. One of our predictions in our reports is that in less than 5 years, there will be pretty inexpensive objective assessments of cognition, probably online, that each of us can take maybe in half an hour, like an annual mental checkup, so we can compare how we are improving or worsening different mental abilities as we age, and that will inform what interventions, what we do with our lives. There is already insurance companies, by the way, offering these kind of things online as a pilot. The US Army also has, this is interesting, so let me just touch on it. The US Army right now has already assessed over 150,000 soldiers before they are sent to Iraq and Afghanistan using this kind of objective cognitive assessments so that when they come back, they can compare the pre-deployment with the post-deployment brain fitness performance, and then detect if people may have had traumatic brain injury or may have had any explosion or any problem, in which case they are sent to the doctor, they are sent to the psychologist. But it's a very useful pre and post test, and the instruments already are there. Again, you cannot test 150,000 soldiers by having them visit a psychologist in person and spend a whole day of batteries. But you can use some automated assessments. Now, to talk about different brain functions, I thought that it was a good experiment to ask you a favor. So the favor I want to ask you is first to close your eyes. I promise I won't steal your wallet. And I would like now you to remember 4 different times in your life. The first one is a moment where you engage in some physical exercise It can be hiking, walking, playing sports, anything you want to think of. And just try to remember how you felt after having engaged in that physical exercise. Try to remember what you did, maybe remember the effort, remember what came afterwards. Just allow yourself to remember more and more details and to make the feeling as vivid as possible. Now let's go to another moment when you had a loving exchange with someone. You gave something to someone you loved, you received something in exchange. Try to remember the experience and how you felt afterwards. Next, try to remember what was the most caring gesture that you ever received. Maybe something unexpected that someone gave you as a present, as a gesture, that surprised you, that touched you, made you feel special. What was that gesture, how you felt? And finally, try now to visit again and to see in your mind's eye the most beautiful landscape that you have ever seen. Try to remember, try to travel there again and see what you saw, who were you with, maybe what you heard or what you smelled. Try to relive that experience. Okay, you can open your eyes now. And I'm sure that you feel differently now than only 1 minute ago. This is a big group, so we're not going to discuss it in more detail. But why is this important? Because when we think about the brain training and brain function, we usually only think of the more intellectual type things, our IQ stuff. This is as much brain training than anything else. And in fact, a lot of new research is about the importance of what is called emotional self-regulation. Being anxious, stress itself, frustration, anger can be pretty bad for the brain for a variety of reasons. We will touch on that later. So just learning how to manage that, how to recognize those emotions, and how to maybe shift the emotional state to a better one that will lead to better decision making, better judgment, because we have better perspective. That's very important as well. And it's as important in brain fitness that nutrition, that anything else we're going to talk about. And that is very different. Again, different brain function was involved. That if I ask you a typical IQ test, which is which of those 4 figures don't come from the same object? How would you answer that? And if any volunteer wants to give an answer, feel free to go ahead. So which of these 4 images is different from the other ones? It cannot come back from the same object. C. The answer is C, because you could rotate all the other ones and see that the diagonal is in the same way, is from bottom left to top right. This one, if you rotate it, the C, the diagonal would be the other way. So what happened? To solve this question, you had to do some visual rotation in your mind's eye, which is a completely different task than the one we did before, which then is activating different parts of your brain, which is why variety is very important. As we get older, some things tend to improve, some things tend to decline. Let me just touch briefly on one thing that tends to improve is our pattern recognition. Why? Because the more experiences we have, the more patterns we can detect in the environment. So we don't face any new situation as a completely new situation. We think how this compares to 10 other things in my life, and therefore what is the best decision. So we improve on that as we age, but we get worse at things that involve facing completely new situations that we have never seen before, because those depends on things like processing speed, how quickly you can process the new stimuli. It depends on different attention aspects. It depends on what is called working memory as well. So those areas tend to decline as we get older, which is why older adults tend to learn slower than younger adults in new areas. Again, if we're talking about areas you already know a lot, you will probably learn a lot anyway, but if it's completely new, it's going to take longer. So it's very important to know that a lot of the research happening right now is being focused on the obvious question. Well, how can we make sure that we help older adults maintain all those skills that tend to decline as we get older? And there is a variety of interventions that can be useful there. In the book, we interviewed many different experts, and we thought it was important to give you a direct window into what the experts and scientists think, because that's very exciting. I think it's very useful. I will touch very briefly on a few quotes. James Sewell, he gave us a beautiful metaphor, which is in a sense thinking about brain fitness, thinking about learning, is thinking about gardening our own brains, how to help physically grow our neurons, grow and connections. So I think it's a very beautiful metaphor to think of how to cultivate, again, our physical brain. Some great news from another leading neuroscientist, talking how he's involved in a variety of training programs, from meditation to some software programs for kids, for older adults. A very important message is that no one has found any ceiling, meaning that you cannot think, oh, I already think a lot, there's no more need for me to think more. Well, the more you exercise your brain, the more your functions will improve, and the more you will delay the potential onset of symptoms. We will talk later about Jacob Stern, a scientist working with Joshua, and also other people in Columbia. That was also his key message, is the more and more activities you engage in, the lower the risk of Alzheimer's is. So there's no, and it is accumulated, so the more is the better, basically. We also interviewed the wife of the reporter, Boudreaux, who had a horrible bomb attack in Iraq. His brain, I don't know if you have seen pictures of his skull, was completely damaged, was completely depressed. The pictures are pretty horrific. But when you see how he has been able to recover with the right cognitive and physical rehabilitation, it's pretty amazing. And it's a beautiful example of how flexible the brain is. That even if it was so bad damage in one point, it was able to repair itself, and through the right processes into being completely functional. Now, very briefly, what are the four? So we're talking about neuroplasticity. We're talking the brain is very flexible, very plastic. So the question is, so what? So how can I drive that change in a good way? Because again, as I mentioned before, if you decide to watch TV 24 hours a day for a week, your brain is also going to change, but it won't change in the way you want it to change, right? So what are ways to drive good neuroplasticity? Having a balanced diet is very important. So for example, if people are only eating fast food, that may be the best priority to change. Second, aerobic exercise. Third, stress management. And fourth, mental stimulation. In the book, we obviously cover in depth all of them, but now we don't have time for everything. Let me just point out a couple of things. One, in terms of the diet, we reviewed a lot of the, overall for the book, we reviewed several hundred scientific studies, trying to go to the source. Okay, what did scientists find, and then how can we explain it? In terms of diet, just the sort of science, how the things that you already know are good for your body, from fruit to vegetables, to a balanced nutrition, to fish, because it has omega-3, things that contain folic acid as well. So those things are important, but the message is a balanced nutrition. There is very, very little evidence behind any specific supplement. And there are millions of supplements, and there's not a lot of science behind them. Again, as I mentioned before, the main one is probably ginkgo biloba, but overall, most of them seem to work through the placebo effect. If you think something will help you, it will help you, which is great news, right? But if we decide to fool ourselves, let's try to fool ourselves with the things that are more likely to help us than with the ones that are not so likely to help us. Stress management is very important because stress itself, chronic stress, can be pretty bad, can contribute to neuron death, and also reduce the amount of new neurons that is being created. I cannot go in detail why, but there is a very fun book called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. And it's talking about the importance of stress. In our website, we have a section with many books that I'm going to talk about. Obviously, you are in the most amazing library of the universe, so you can talk to them about all these books, and they will have all the copies. And last, we will talk now more about mental stimulation. So what is good mental stimulation? One, you need novelty, you need variety, and you need challenge. So if there is something I think to take from this talk would be, well, how do I integrate more novelty, more variety, and more challenge in my daily lives? And that can happen through coming to lectures like this. It can happen through your job. If you have a job where you have been for 20 years doing the same tasks, well, you should be aware that that's not going to be very useful for your brain. So changing the brain would be changing your brain. You can either change your brain or you can change your job. And challenge. So if things are very easy for us, are in our comfort zone, it's not going to push us the same way that biceps. Again, if I go to a gym and I train my biceps using the same resistance every time, I'm not building muscle. I need to add resistance so that I build muscle. So the brain also needs that level of extra challenge all the time. And this is the maybe visual metaphor. So this is a view from the top of a cross-training circuit. So you can see the different machines. So you can think of the different tools. Again, with tools I mean can be nutrition, can be stress management, can be meditation, can be the growing number of brain tennis products out there. None of them is a magic pill, but they can be very useful tools to target, to improve specific functions. So we need to understand, what do I want to train and why, and then which intervention is the one that is going to help me. Again, that's why we thought there was a need for the guide, because every company obviously is trying to tell you that whatever product they sell is the best one for everything and for everyone, and that's not the case. They can be very useful, but for specific groups of people, for specific aims. I already talked about this interview with Jacob Stern. It's a very good one in the book, but I asked him so from his research, what is one of the most important public policy implications? And he said the most important thing may be to try to reduce dropout rates. Because if kids drop out from school, they typically then obviously don't go to college. The kind of jobs they get are not as stimulating as if they had gone to college. The kind of hobbies they develop are not very stimulating. So there is a huge trajectory change between people who continue high school, college, and then who don't, in terms of Alzheimer's, in terms of cognitive health. So that's a very interesting way to think how education has a big impact on lifelong brain health. Another interesting interview, the only point I want to highlight is he insisted a lot on being aware of the side effects of medicaments. And as we get older, usually we get more and more medicaments. Sometimes they may counteract with each other, but also from the cognitive, from the memory point of view. So if we're taking a new medicament, and we feel, even subjectively, that maybe our memory is not as good as it used to be, or concentration, maybe it's good to talk to a doctor, maybe to ask what may be happening, to change to a new drug, to have no drugs. Anyway, but the mental effects of medicaments are very important to keep in mind when we are having drugs themselves. So Arthur Kramer made, I think, a very interesting suggestion, which is, well, if we know that social engagement and physical exercise and mental exercise all are very important, how can we try to combine all those things? So he suggested that we should have more walking book clubs. So next time you have a book club, try to say, hey, I'm going to bring a book, and I can suggest which book. But find 2 or 3 friends to discuss it and just give a walk. And maybe that's an idea for New York Public Library, right? I'm sure. I see some people there saying yes. So, well, so that would be easy to implement. And then, I mean, why not? So that's the message, I think, from this lecture. So do you think that it is London cab drivers or London bus drivers, the ones who are exercising their brains more? Yeah, correct. And the implication of that is pretty astounding. The implication of that, and the studies show, is that they physically grow the hippocampus specific structures that deal with driving around a city and with remembering very complex routes. And that reduces their cognitive, their memory problems. And this has been pretty serious studies tracking people over years. And why does this happen? Again, it doesn't mean we all have to become taxi drivers, right? But it reinforces the message of challenge, of novelty. So a taxi driver every day has different clients and has to think how to move from this route to this route. And in London, they have to go through very strict licensing requirements, so they truly must remember, in a very complex metropolis, the most efficient route from each place to each place. So before they drive, they have to visualize in their head how to navigate. And that happens maybe 5, 10 times every single day during their careers. Versus the bus driver just follows the same route, right? Day after day after day. It's just a routine. Still, there is some mental activity because has to see the lights, has to decide to stop or to accelerate, but it's nothing compared to that. So I think this is a very beautiful example, and there are many, of the need for mental exercise that includes novelty, variety, and challenge, compared to just following a routine. This is another example. So I would like to do a little experiment with your brains, with your permission. And I would like, first of all, to ask you to read the line on the top. So just read it. I'm sure you can do that. OK. Now what I'm going to ask you, so that's mental activity, right? You understand that a monkey cannot do that, or a rat is not going to be able to read that aloud as you did. So it requires a human brain. Now, I would like you to say the color of each word. Don't read the word, but name the color. And we're going to start from here up. So what's this color? Red. OK, one faster. OK. Well, so good news is you do have a human brain, because this is pretty usual response. So that's mental exercise. Why? You have been reading English words for all your lives, so your natural response, that is not genetic. It's just what you have done to your brain, how you have trained your brain for the last years to automatically read when you see some letters. And I ask you to stop that pattern and to develop a new one. That requires concentration, attention, and working memory, because you have to remember the instruction at the same time as you think what is the color. So that's mental exercise. It's not mental activity, and that's part of the message of the book. And what we try to say is, yeah, it's important to say to people, hey, use it or lose it, do crossword puzzles, read books. Well, but that's not enough. This is what it needs to be happening, mental exercise, which can happen in many different ways. Can be, you can teach a class here, as I'm doing right now. I'm sure you have, each of you, some subject in which you are experts. Well, you can teach it. You can change your jobs. You can use some of the new software products. That's what they do, trying to challenge you all the time. You can buy a book. There's many ways to get it, but that's the feeling you have to get for something to be really good for you. But as I mentioned, there are different techniques, and we reviewed the science behind different techniques. We found good science in 4 major areas from a brain training point of view. One is with meditation. There's a lot of research these days showing how meditation can help improve some specific functions and also, therefore, grow physically some specific parts of the brain. Second is cognitive therapy. That usually is more useful with people who have depression or anxiety, but can be very useful principles basically for everyone. And I interviewed Judith Beck, who has a very fun book out there called Train Your Brain to Think Like a Thin Person. So it's about how to develop the mental skills that are important to have a good nutrition, that therefore is going to help us maintain a good weight, and not just do a diet, lose weight, and then regain it in 3 weeks. So that's very important to be thinking of. There is also very useful tools based on what is called biofeedback. That is something that has been used in medicine for many years to regulate stress. Basically, you get a sensor, either your ear or your finger, that measures what is called heart rate variability or skin conductivity. That is what lie detectors are. So lie detectors don't detect any lie. What they do is they detect anxiety, and the theory is that if a person is saying a lie, is more likely to be anxious than if a person is saying the truth. So that's what the lie detector is. But the technology is very useful to know what's my internal level of anxiety. So now there are some games where in order to win the game, you have to learn how to relax. So that is a very good way to learn. Because we can do yoga, we can do many things, but this can be a faster way to learn new skills. This interview with Brett, he gives a lot of advice, in fact, to traders on how to improve their mental performance to be able to be a better trader. He emphasizes a lot the role to identify emotions and to be able to manage them. Again, emotions are not good or bad. They are useful signals that we have to integrate. And if we have in our daily lives, I'm sure that when you know people, some of them, somehow, you feel better with them than with other people. That's there for a reason. Maybe because some of them, you had a good experience in the past or a bad experience in the past. So listening to emotions is very important as well. This is another critical interview. Again, now in the last year, last 2 years, there's been a lot of talk in the media of brain training, brain fitness, Nintendo, a company called Positive Science. There's a huge PBS, a couple of specials around them. What is, I think, being lost in the media is, and some scientists often in an article will be quoted saying, yes, this works, it's amazing. Some other will be quoted, sorry, this doesn't work. So that's the media, right? Two sides to everything. But that's not very useful. From your point of view is, there was a major study last year by Mayo Clinic and UC Davis showing how one specific product could help older adults. In a sense, I mentioned earlier that as we get older, some skills tend to decline. So in one area of decline is called auditory processing and auditory memory, how you can hear things well and remember what you hear. Using that program, you could reverse 10 years of aging in that specific function and closely associated functions. So what the media sometimes is trying to portray is that program helped you reverse 10 years of aging. That is not correct. It did improve, and it was effective in a very narrow set of skills that is extremely useful. I mean, to be able to hear better, to understand conversations in a noisy environment, in a restaurant, it has great implications. But we have to understand better what those tools do and what they don't do. So in the book itself, we go much deeper into what are all these cognitive and emotional abilities that are important to maintain as we get older, and which of these products, if any, can be useful there. So, and that's where we went there, saying, okay, does brain training work or doesn't work? Yeah, of course it works, but if we define work in a way that makes sense. So what is the targeted abilities we're trying to improve and why? And therefore, I mean, yes, there are things that can improve. The same thing as physical fitness. Again, you can understand that if you are trying to train your cardiovascular capacity, maybe crunching your abdominals is not going to help. But if you want to improve your abdominals, I mean, crunching your abdominals is going to help. So it depends on what is your objective. Many people say, I have some memory problems. Well, but often it's not memory. It is attention. If you don't pay attention to something, if you don't process it correctly, how can you remember it? The usual example is, where are my glasses, right? But usually the problem is not memory. It is, well, if I was so distracted or doing so many things when I put my glasses somewhere, how can I remember it later? So it's attention, not memory. So we have to understand a bit better. And also, that's why I think the New York Public Library, this is an educational priority right now to explain how the brain works, the importance of all these different functions. Just another example, AAA, the Association of Drivers in the US, has just started to endorse a product that trains the specific cognitive skills involved in driving. So as you are driving, you can realize, hey, this is a complex mental activity. You have to have good peripheral vision, divided attention. So those things tend to decline as we get older, and they can be trained. So, well, let's focus on training those. And again, it's not the panacea, doesn't help all the problems in the universe. has not been shown if that has any effect on Alzheimer's, but I mean, it can help people be safer drivers, which can have huge implications for themselves and for society. So we have to understand a bit better what we try to do. There's a lot of research trying to measure cognitive on the left and brain-based outcomes on the right. So in the book, one chapter is just a review of the 21 products that we thought were more popular and already presented some value. We try to categorize them in saying some of them may be good for overall maintenance. So, okay, you can read a book or do some crossword puzzles or use some of these games. They can be more stimulating. Usually they are cheaper, but they have less science behind them. The targeted training ones tend to have more research behind, but proving very specific benefits, either in working memory or in auditory processing or whatever it is, but it tends to be more narrow, not so horizontal, and they tend to be more expensive. So you have to understand, hey, do I really need that before you buy it? And then we also cover some products for stress management, again, because until recently, that technology usually was very, very expensive, only available through doctors' offices or maybe sports teams. Now some devices are maybe $200, $150, $250. So I mean, they start to be pretty inexpensive. That's just a list. I'm sure every year you will see more products. So how can I evaluate all these different products or options? One, the first questions, and this is in the book, but also for free, is in the website as well, in SharpBrains.com. Well, the first ones are more about the science. I mean, of course, that's important, right? It's not the only criteria, but it's very important to think, if this product, if I want it for one objective, well, I want to see some validation that that's likely to happen. Second, the next questions are more about what is the specific objective I want to get. And the last ones are, well, whatever it is, at the very least, it should follow the right guidelines that we mentioned earlier of offering novelty, challenge, and also not being too stressful, because if it is too stressful, it can be counterproductive. So perhaps even, I mean, right now, New York Public Library, I'm sure has many different lectures, and you can decide maybe which one should I go to. Well, maybe you can decide, well, these exercises, is it going to become something new? Is it going to be a bit challenging? It won't be too stressful. And by the way, when I introduced some exercises, that was what I was trying to do, right? To introduce some new things, but in a way that was more fun, that was not intimidating, because then you don't want to engage in them. So there's an art to this, but from your point of view, it's important to keep those guidelines in mind. And we're getting close to the end, so we have time for questions and answers. So as I mentioned, this is not a book about, this is the prescription for your brain. This is about information useful now, and also useful for the next following year, so you understand what is happening. So we try to offer some predictions based on trends that we already see today. There are three key main themes. One, that brain fitness is going mainstream. And again, you can think of physical fitness 100 years ago didn't exist, even as a concept. Now you have the concept, you have the industry, you have a health club in every corner, you have personal trainers, you have the awareness that I have to exercise my brain. We think the same thing is going to happen, again, little by little, with brain fitness. There's going to be a better integration of health clubs with brain fitness. So this is going to be very interesting to watch, because a public library is doing more and more things like this one. Health clubs are doing the same thing. They're saying, hey, people already come to us to exercise their body. Well, the brain is part of the body. So what can we offer? Either lectures or programs, so that people have here the whole brain and body workout. From the public policy point of view, the US is not doing that much right now. And frankly, in the health reform debate, I think this aspect is being lost, because there's many other priorities. But in places like Canada, there's a lot of activity from a purely public policy point of view. They invested, the government of Ontario and some local investors, $20 million in a research center called the Brain Fitness Center in Baycrest to develop technologies precisely for brain fitness. They have a nationalized health care system, so they have good technologies, and they have the system to then distribute it everywhere. So we expect a lot of activity coming from Canada. I mean, and then hopefully it will maybe inspire us here to do better things. We can expect to have better tools. And again, this is not about magic pills. It's about tools that we can learn how to use. The trend number 4, I think, is the one that is very important, and still the media has not even started to cover it. It's about the availability of online objective assessments of cognitive abilities. Why is that important? Well, it's important for 2 main reasons. One, to have better diagnostics. Second, to direct treatment or to direct what each of us want to do. Let me explain the first one. The way that today people with Alzheimer's or people with cognitive impairment are being diagnosed by doctors is there is some tests, and those tests are normalized by the age group or by the gender, or perhaps even the education level. But that's a one-time assessment that compares you against people who are not you. So if you were very smart to start with or very well educated, you will never be diagnosed with anything, even if you have it, simply because you are above the average in your norm. So what would be more useful is to say, well, I want to track my own performance year after year, and if there is a sudden decline, well, maybe that is a red flag for me to discuss with my doctor or for the doctor to monitor that. So that objective assessment over time would be very useful, both for assessments and to direct then the treatment, or to know me, is my bottleneck working memory or auditory processing or emotional self-regulation? So again, that's not available now for you. It's already available to the military, to researchers, insurance companies are starting to use those tools. Well, but you can expect, because it's not very expensive. This is not like you have to do a very expensive fMRI machine, but this is more an online assessment, half an hour. Now, the last one is also very important, which is why I'm glad that here we have both the public and librarians. There's going to be a lot of need for professional development. Many of the concepts we need to talk, most people don't know about them. Again, I've been talking about working memory. Well, how many of you had heard of working memory before this talk started? Okay, I'm seeing maybe 7, 8 hands. So let me give you an example of what it is. I'm going to tell you now the 5 digits of a telephone number and try to ask you to remember them backwards. So you want to be 65024. Okay, so I don't know if you can remember. I mean, I can now push you a bit more and say 6 digits and 7 digits. So most people may remember perhaps usually 5 to 7. That's usually that working memory ability is an area where there is exploding amount of research of why it is so important for learning at all ages and how it can be enhanced. And that's very important for learning. So we can expect more need for professional development on concepts and research like working memory that most consumers and even most professionals who are outside neuroscience have never heard before. As I mentioned before, AAA is starting to recommend a program. I interviewed the person from the AAA Foundation responsible for recommending the program for safe driving, and he said that in his view, there's already enough research today to start doing what they are doing, which is to endorse products. They're doing some major pilots. If results are good, he says, well, maybe in the next few years, insurance companies will not only just endorse products, but they could offer you a discount in your premium if you go through the program, because then you are less likely to have accidents. I mean, and they want to reward good behavior. So things like this, there's a lot of professional activity going on all the time, and that is what is happening. So with that, I want to just reemphasize that we are, I think, starting a new era. And the most important thing is that we need a new culture. A new culture that is not so much about Alzheimer's disease or which magic pill, which medicament is going to solve our problems. It's about understanding what is the role of lifestyle to address the different priorities we each may have. So for example, if I go to Burger King or McDonald's to have my breakfast, lunch, dinner every single day, most likely changing that would be my top priority for my brain health. That's different than if I already have a very healthy diet, but I'm living a more sedentary life. I don't do a lot of cardiovascular exercise, so then cardiovascular exercise may be my top priority. At the very least, to do 3 times a week. So the usual guideline for the brain is doing aerobic exercise maybe 3 times a week of half an hour each is a minimum threshold. So if I'm not meeting that, I really need to do that. If I'm becoming stressed all the time, well, stress management may be my priority. If I'm retired or my job is a bit repetitive, boring, maybe the mental activity and exercise should be my priority. If I'm taking too many medicaments, my doctor doesn't even know what I'm taking, well, then some medication management may be the priority. If I don't sleep, we know that sleep deprivation can be pretty bad for learning and memory, so that can be my priority. So it's very important to change the culture so people can understand the importance of all these elements and which one may be more relevant for them. And also to start expanding the vocabulary, because everyone thinks of memory, but memory itself is not the main thing that our brain does. So we have to start thinking, well, we have brains to process all the visual and auditory information we have, to be able to regulate our emotions, to have executive functions, which is the ability to plan ahead, to define goals, and to accomplish them. We have working memory, long-term memory. So this is part of the vocabulary that we try to discuss in the book that I think is very important for both consumers, or for all of us, and for professionals to start to learn more about. So that is it. This is the talk I wanted to give. Now we have time for Q&A. The book itself, you can have more information in SharpBrains.com. We have the monthly e-newsletter. The book is here. So in fact, Marcena just told me that next week there will be a few copies here in the library, so you can order it here. You can also get it through Amazon.com, and you can also contact me in that email address. And so thank you very much for letting me exercise my brain. I hope it was good for you. So now we have 10, 15 minutes for questions, answers, comments. Yeah?
You mentioned meditation, and I'm curious. I can obviously see how that would reduce stress, but by what other mechanisms is that helping to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, because the usual conception is only good for stress. But so what is meditation? It involves a lot of attention to your own thoughts. So it's building the prefrontal cortex that is involved in attention. So it's very good for building attention and the parts that are involved in attention. So for example, now some schools are trying to do meditation, maybe for kids with attention deficit disorder. Saying for attention deficit, I mean, if the deficit is attention, what are ways that are not drug-based? I mean, you can still have Ritalin, whatever, but are there ways that are more educational? So many of them are using meditation to do that. No, but that's a great point, because many hospitals usually use it from a purely stress reduction point of view, but more and more we see it from the attention building point of view as well. The work of Michael Posner that I mentioned earlier is built on how to build what he calls executive attention through either meditation or through software, through brain training, and both of them seem to be pretty effective. So. Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, the question is, oh yeah, that's true. Maybe you should. Okay. I can repeat it because I don't have an accent. So the question was, why is aerobic exercise the main recommendation more than playing sports or anything? So that's not what I wanted to say. So because also sports, anything that raises the heart rate is aerobic. So the main difference is between anything that builds heart rate, or just very slow walking, or just doing weights. So that kind of physical exercise is not as good for the brain, because it doesn't contribute to the generation of new neurons and to growth factors and to other things that happens when we start sending more blood and more oxygen to the brain, which starts when the activity is a bit more aerobic. So, but it can be sports, yeah, it can be anything that increases heart rate. Even fast walking, right? If you walk fast, it will also help. Yeah. So that's a great. So the question is exactly. I mean, what's the difference between mental activity, mental exercise, specifically in terms of crossword puzzles or Sudoku or other things people can do? And he also asks, what is more efficient? So let me first. I will answer the question in two ways. First is that it depends on who you are and what you do. So if you are a person doing crossword puzzles like crazy every day for the last 20 years, then I would say do Sudoku, right? Because it's going to be new, it's going to be more challenging. If you are doing Sudoku like crazy, well, then do crossword puzzles. And this example, I use it all the time with the media, because when they talk about video games, right, and kids. Are video games good or bad? Well, it's impossible to answer that question. Video games for whom? If I'm talking about video games for you, who I suspect have not been working on video games for the last 30 years of your life, maybe using a video game can be pretty good. For kids, who maybe already are using too many video games, maybe they should do more crossword puzzles. So it depends. So the key ingredient is challenge, is novelty. So it depends on where we are coming from, what is going to be more. Now, the only part of the question is out what is more efficient. And that's a very interesting way to phrase the question. Because in a sense, that's part of the whole controversy of many of the brain training products. So the brain products, like from Cogmed to Positive Science, MindFit, whatever, they can be extremely efficient because they target one specific brain function. So only in, let's say, 10 hours, maybe you can enhance that function in ways that in the real life, you cannot do in 10 hours because you are doing many other things at the same time. So it still is possible. Maybe, for example, by playing the piano, playing the piano itself, it's a great way to drive good neuroplasticity, to build attention, to build executive functions, but that may take you 20 years. So efficiency is something very important as well to keep in mind when we are talking about big interventions. And physical fitness, that's what this is, right? It's about what is the most efficient way to enhance one targeted ability. So that's only starting to happen from the brain point of view, but there's not enough information to exactly say what is more efficient right now for your objectives. Just for example, what all of you think is the most important thing I did today to exercise your brains? Okay, something else. The hands, okay. No, those are great examples. What else? Another one. Okay, so people remember the exercises. Well, there was one more element, which is the joke I made earlier, which is my accent. Okay. So as you can imagine, I didn't do it on purpose, but what can I do? But that, again, I don't know if that's more efficient, but clearly you have been exposed to 50 minutes of a completely different accent to what you are used to. That probably has forced you to pay more attention, to even be thinking more. Again, so it's great brain exercise. So,
I'm speaking out of my own experience. I'm asking you to extrapolate. How does one remain fit? How does one keep one's brain fit during this time of recession, unemployment, uselessness? I think a lot of us younger people are having a hard time. We're experiencing what older people often will experience. If you have any comments on that.
So I would say that's why we talk. So the question is more about in the current environment and recession and crisis that can affect each of us. What can we do in terms of how to remain sane and how to remain fit in this environment? And that also is not about aging at all people. It also affects, it's a challenge for people of all ages. So the answer is really, that's why we stress so much the importance of stress management and emotional regulation. And that's why I did the exercise where I asked you to close your eyes and try to visualize more positive things. Because through life, we are all going to face very difficult problems. Some of them are because of the crisis, some of them because someone left us, sometimes because I was fired. There's always going to be problems. But how we learn how to recognize those emotions and how to regulate them is going to really impact our quality of life. So it's not so much what happens to us, but how we react to what happens to us. And again, it's very easy to say, but the right training and over time is going to be very helpful to regulate those emotions. And just to give you some examples of, now there's sort of research on how kids who are educated in conditions of poverty, they have much higher levels of stress, and that stress can impact parts of the brain that are important for learning and for academic performance. So for many kids in puberty, probably the most important intervention is not mathematical remediation or reading, it's stress management. I mean, it would be obviously how to change their environment, but I mean, you cannot do that, but how to help the kids, and ideally their parents as well, because maybe what's happening is that the stress from the parents is going to the kids. So stress management, emotional self-regulation is extremely important for brain function, brain fitness, and that's one area that we talk a lot in the book, and I think that the media is not covering that very well, because the media is all about now aerobic exercise, which is very important, and there's sort of new research, mental exercise, also very important, but I think especially for young people, stress management may be equally important. No, yeah. So the question is if I can recommend a website or a place to measure cognitive ability. So the challenge right now, again, is that the serious instruments, the way to go is to go to a psychologist, to a neuropsychologist, to an EMT. There's no website, there's nothing. I mean, I would love to do it myself. I mean, I have access to things because of our work, but those kind of instruments are not available to the public. So I would suggest that a physician or a psychologist is the best person to do it. Yeah.
If you wanted to start a cognitive fitness training center within a library for an older population, what product would you recommend because of that? There's so many things on the market, and many of it relates to fast speed, and we know older brains don't move that fast.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are so quick they can't be.
Hmm?
So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions.
So the question is pretty broad, is if someone was thinking of opening a cognitive fitness center inside a library, how to do that, what products to offer. I would first start not with saying what products to offer, I would say more general, like what to do, right? So first, again, I think it should be a lot of education. So you should have a lot of guest speakers, a lot of talks, maybe some publications of what is working memory. I mean, what is all different things of the brain? Well, I mean, but that's for the people in this room, right? I mean, you have a center, hopefully you have many more people all the time. So those new people need access to education all the time. Then you will need different tools. But again, the tools can be, you can have a yoga instructor, you can have meditation, you can have visualizations like the one we did, and you can have also some computer lab with some products. So again, I can answer that, but in the context of everything. And also you may have also some expert in-house who can help people guide them based on their priorities through which class or which program may be more useful. In terms of which products, well, first of all, the good thing, I mean, the one thing where, so social engagement, meeting other friends, other people, is very important, is very good. But the challenge is, for example, if I wanted to train all your working memory right now, it would be impossible because you come from different levels. Some of you can remember 5 things, some 7, some 6. So if I propose something, for some of you it will be very easy. So I cannot customize something for each of you. Computer-based programs, that's what they can do pretty well. They can see what's the capacity for each person and then challenge that specific person. So most of them are pretty good at adapting what they offer to the people. So the criteria to decide which one to buy, I would say, is based on budget, right? What's the budget? Some of them can have great science, but be extremely expensive. Maybe it's not worth to start there. Some of them are pretty inexpensive. Some of them are based on CD-ROMs. You start in a computer. Some of them are online, so you have an online connection. Some of them are maybe $9 a month. I mean, that can be a good way to start. So, I mean, I have to answer that there's many different products that you will have to see which one is the one you want to offer based on your budget. I mean, we don't endorse any particular product, right? Because we don't want to be engaged in endorsing. But I mean, there are some good products out there. And in the book, what we try to do is just to review each of them so you can make a good decision. And we can talk now if you want. Yeah?
From the first exercise that we did with the circle and the square, do you know of any products or programs that exercises both hands at the same time in that type of fashion?
No, that's a great question.
Outside of learning a musical instrument, but something other than that.
Yeah. No, that's so the question is, he was wondering if the exercise I proposed, the circle and square at the same time, if there are some other products, computer-based products, that engage you in activities like that one? And the answer is I don't know any, but that's a great question, right, for computer games, because now we have one mouse. What are having games with two mouses, right? You could have two mouses. Well, I guess some video games, I mean, the consoles, I mean, that's what they do, right? You have to move one mouse, and then you have to kill all the people with the other button. But I don't know of any.
That doesn't really exercise, both, because
Yeah.
you're only doing this as opposed to.
No, I don't know. I mean, I suspect that with more technology, there will be, and now with virtual reality. I mean, right now, I'm sure there's some very expensive equipment that you get a helmet, and I'm sure, I mean, the army has some of these things. You have then two gloves, and then you're supposed to do things. But I don't know anything that can be, I mean, useful from a general public point of view. Usually they're used more for people who have post-stress traumatic disorder, I mean, things pretty dramatic, and more from the stress management point of view, not from the, but it's very interesting. There is a game, I don't know who produces it, it's called Revolution, but it's this one where you have to dance, Dance Dance Revolution. Okay.
Most of our libraries have the Wii.
Mm-hmm.
Have the dance thing,
Yep.
have the aerobics, you have the yoga, have the people that do the games. I'm not good at that, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're gonna have active skills in our branches, and they cover a lot of what you're saying as far as how do you.
Yeah. So those games, again, they're not designed from a clinical point of view to exercise specific things, but they can be very useful and very fun ways. I gave another talk like this in the Bronx on Wednesday, and there was one librarian, or I don't know if she was a librarian, but someone who said that someone who had Alzheimer's disease, they were trying to think how to motivate that person to do something new and challenging, and that he loved Wii, the golf product, because the guy with Alzheimer's, Wii Golf, the Nintendo Wii Golf, yeah, exactly. I have to. So, because he was a good golfer and that was helpful. So, yeah, maybe that the Wii would be a good way to do that. The other one I was thinking is the Dance Dance Revolution. That, I mean, I'm sure, I probably don't have it here, but I don't know where you can get it. And it's more, the screen is going to give you a lot of complex, well, it's like the Guitar Hero concept. I know you know Guitar Hero, where the screen is telling you what to do all the time, and you have to coordinate that very quickly. So that would be a good way. But again, it's not clinical, but it can be a good way to coordinate things. Any other, yeah?
Yes, I actually have 3 questions, so I'm combining this way. I'm wondering, what is the impact on the brain of the following things: sugar, anesthesia, and music? Not that they belong together, but
Well, let me start with the last one, with music, because there is a lot of evidence. So one of the few professions where a scientist, if a scientist opened a brain, he could say, hey, this is a musician brain, he's a musician. Because for professional musicians, just through the training they have to do 3 years, they grow specific parts of the brain that deal with their activities in such a profound way that it would be easy for a scientist to observe what it is. So music, obviously, again, any activity, I mean, the point of the talk is that any activity, any thought, the fact that you ask that question, change your brain slightly in a way that was different than if you hadn't asked the question. Now, if you are a musician, it means you are doing that for millions of hours throughout your life. So the effect is obviously much more profound. The second one, I'm not sure about anesthesia. I know a lot about chemotherapy. So chemotherapy is pretty, I mean, there's more and more research showing how it can have very negative cognitive impairment. So for example, in that context, it would be very important, we believe, to have a cognitive baseline. So the person can have the cognitive assessment before chemotherapy, afterwards, so the doctor can see, hey, is there some problem? And then if there is some process to rehabilitate the cognitive aspect, I mean, they can monitor. Right now, it's like a black box, right? The person is complaining, I think I have a problem. And the doctor, some of them may be skeptical, and that's normal, nothing happens. Some of them may be more understanding, but still, they don't have a good way to monitor progress. So yeah, it can have, I mean, it's a huge chemical bomb, if you want, right? That makes sense because of the danger that you have there, but I mean, it has consequences. And the first one was sugar. So sugar, well, one good thing that we have in our brain is what is called the brain-blood or the blood-brain barrier, which is many things we eat don't end up in our brain, because the brain, in a sense, has like a defense mechanism to make sure that bad things don't go to the brain. So they're very, and that's, for example, why pharmaceutical companies, it's so frustrating for them to develop new drugs to improve brain function, because they cannot get up to the brain. And you are not going to open your brain, right, and allow them to put a drug directly. So things like sugar or nutrition, I mean, they have an important role. And I mean, too much saturated food, maybe too much sugar, can be pretty bad from a diet point of view. But it's not that, I mean, it's not that bad anyway. But it's not that good. I mean, some people may think, oh, sugar may be good because it's going to be glucose, and you need glucose for brain activity. I mean, that's why we say, in general, a good nutrition overall is important. But when we think of very particular supplements or ingredients, we think that people are worrying too much about that. Yeah, no, so coffee, that's another obviously area where there is a lot of research. Oh, I think we have to wrap up. Oh, sorry, sir. So the question is the most important one for all of you. What about coffee? So the research, again, is not perfect. It's like with red wine, right? Every week it says the opposite of the week before, which is good, right? Because it means if something was so bad, it would be more clear that it's bad, right? So it's always a matter of degree. But let me answer coffee in two ways. One, there's recent research suggesting that it makes more sense to drink a little bit of coffee several times during the day than drink a big coffee in the beginning of the day. Because the amount of coffee the brain can process is limited. So you drink too much, in a sense you are wasting part of the coffee. It would make more sense. So it doesn't make sense to get a big, whatever they call it, super venti in Starbucks. But it may make sense to go there 3 times during the day, if what you want is the extra performance. In terms of long-term effects, I think most of it's not very clear that is good or bad. I haven't seen any study that allows me to say, don't drink more than 3 cups or whatever. I mean, like anything is bad to abuse, but oh yeah, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that I can increase alertness. Yeah, I mean for everyone. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other question? Okay, you're free. Thank you.
Thank you so much.